Tonight on Skunk Hollow Chop Shop, I flash back to the 90s, which probably isn't the worst idea at this point in human history. Welcome back to Skunk Hollow Chop Shop, a series where I bend the definition of cyberpunk to fit whatever the hell I want on an irregular basis. Also, the lighting is pretty irregular. Today I'm looking at a fairly well-known side-scroller and a severely unknown futuristic racing game. Flashback is a fairly well-known cinematic platformer. How many times have I said well-known already? Who knows? I don't think the term cinematic platformer was around in the 90s, but other things you can slot into that genre would be like Prince of Persia, Another World, Blackthorn, and Nosferatu. Not only that, but the early Tomb Raider games were that style writ large. Precise footwork, occasional reflex tests, fetch quests, and sometimes acrobatics. I feel like while media wrestled with the notion of bringing William Gibson's world to life in the hangover of the 80s, in the meantime, mid-90s cyberpunk was sort of more about tech. Knowing what we know now about the insidiousness of tech companies, it could probably be argued that Silicon Valley had more influence than we were aware of. That's not like some tinfoil hat thing, I just mean like, you know, fuck Facebook or whatever. You'll see what I mean. Rather than gritty, intentionally suffocating neon urban drama, the end result is centered more around the stark contrast of the game's plainclothes everyman Lester Chaikin, set against a backdrop of primarily future tech and once unreachable alien worlds. Even the bits you could call urban are a means to an end. Steel-walled, brutalist subways whose only purpose is shuffling you from office to office searching for employment. You'll get the plot in the first 20 minutes, so I'm not overreaching by telling you. The protagonist figured out that some humans have more molecules, which means they're aliens? Something like that, some they-live shit. So since that's like dangerous knowledge, people are trying to whack him. Development was handled by Delphine Software International, although without Another World creator Eric Shahi. Controls are standard for the genre. You can either run or take one step at a time, and if a jump looks feasible, you can do it. I did find myself fumbling with which buttons are which. I kept forgetting what pulls out your handgun and what interacts with background objects. Something that tends to plague this style of game is, rather than the swift overall gameplay of a Mario, a Sonic, or an awkward Euro platformer of your choice, Flashback tends to dole out a little progress, then give you a puzzle or awkward death trap after a while. The momentum in the game stops until you figure things out, but to be honest, this might be more of a way of lengthening the game. Prince of Persia was simplistic enough that later ports of it just added tons of stages to make the game longer, but you won't find that here. Not saying that the game is super short, just that levels feel artificially longer. Of course, this has more action to balance things out, especially compared to Another World, but I'm not sure it was implemented all that well. There are these shithead tennis ball things that follow you around occasionally and require a specific kind of hit detection to defeat, and a lot of shootouts are based on paying attention to enemy patterns rather than full-on action. At one point, you're on a TV show called Death Tower, which aims for the Running Man but just sort of feels like Stage 3 of Flashback. It's odd that Flashback lacks something Another World and Prince of Persia reveled in: elaborate deaths. When you take enough hits, you lie down and never wake up. Since I mentioned Gibson earlier, I should point out I wasn't thrilled with Neuromancer's trip to space near its end. I didn't like the incongruous alien planet stuff in Perfect Dark, and the shift to a foreign planet in Flashback wasn't any different. Seems there was a point where cyberpunk was still new enough that it was beholden to sci-fi tropes, and I could do without. A remake of Flashback was started for the Game Boy Advance with a brighter, more GBA familiar graphic style, but the plug was pulled when Delphine closed down in 2004. There was also a 2013 remake, which I only found out about just now, but chances are this is the version you want to play, and it actually got a physical release for some modern systems. Honestly, it kind of sounds like I wasn't into this, but it kept my attention long enough for me to get to the alien world, and then I kind of lost interest. I feel like this might have more novelty if you weren't around when it was new, so if you're like super young, go ahead and check it out, because it might seem weird, or maybe you'll see what the fuss is about. I don't know. A sequel popped up 3 years later called Fade to Black, which took a third-person perspective, which is kind of like Tomb Raider. So it all kind of loops around in a weird way. It sold okay and was reviewed okay. Once upon a time, I was clicking around on the Cyberpunk database when I stumbled across the mention of this game. New York Race, aka NYR, which, I mean, I don't know why they shortened the title, but what's done is done. It's a little-known racing game based on the well-known Luc Besson film The Fifth Element. The thumbnail on the game listing was for the PS2 version, which I couldn't care less about, but a Game Boy version was also listed, and I have like a perverse affection for D-Makes, so I was kind of curious how they took something that was meant for the PS2 and mushed it down into a Nintendo handheld. But it's a completely different game. It's a top-down racer in the style of Micro Machines with a dual-plane design like Vertical Force for the Virtual Boy, and it's pretty fucking decent. Now, of course, there are no recognizable stars in this game, and to be honest, a Game Boy racing game where you could play as Tricky would have been fucking amazing. Maybe someone should get on that. It seems the main connection with the film is the taxi you start out in, and that's it. No Mila, no Bruno, no Gary Oldman. I hope they didn't shell out too much for the license. NYR's strong suit is definitely its controls. Dipping in and out of the streets is a matter of rocking the control pad up and down, and steering is sort of mostly about keeping your ass end from swerving out of control. This is a French company named Psylogic's only game under the Callisto umbrella and released by Wanadu. This is probably a good time to point out that NYR falls squarely in the category of semi-obscure European video games. Most often they fall back on cartoon licenses that never catch on in the US, like Asterix, or BB Bloxburg, or the Oddifants. Consequently, we end up missing out on stuff like the top-down adventure adaptation of John Romero's Daikatana, a rather pretty take on Archer McLean's Drop Zone, or something I'll be discussing in a future episode, this wild top-down RoboCop game that sort of starts out as a point-and-click adventure. Weapons are cornerly enough based on the elements, with a fifth element pickup that disables other cars entirely. That one's pretty great. Otherwise, the blue circle is water, which releases bubbles behind you in the style of a Mario Kart banana, air, which looks like a bubbly X shape, that's your speed booster, fire, which is a sort of red cyclone looking thing, it's your projectile, and earth, a red square, which is simply invulnerability. In the rare chance you pick up two of the same thing, that weapon becomes more powerful or recharges your health bar in addition to its normal effect. I felt the need to explain all this because no one on the internet has documented it. One thing that's frustrating about NYR is in a lot of instances one mistake will make it impossible to catch back up. More often than not, you'll do a dry run of a map the first time to memorize things about it, then do the race for real the second time. Once you reach a new batch of tracks, you're there for good until you progress, which is odd. Money will eventually trickle in, allowing you to grip one of 8 vehicles, including the Red Wing, which, you guessed it, is powder blue. My main gripes with this were that there's no multiplayer and no time trial stuff, so the replay value is virtually in the toilet. There are 4 batches of tracks and then you're done. Not that I expect a Game Boy game to be all that long, but still. I guess it was kind of rushed, maybe, but the movie was kind of already out, and this was only meant for Europe, so I have no idea what's going on there. Most importantly, I'm pretty sure the video you're watching right now is the first English language review of the game. Should you play it? Maybe, especially if you're a fan of early GTA or the Game Boy Color version of Driver, which I also loved. Should you buy it? If you were the kind of person that bought an Analog Pocket, this would probably be like a decent conversation piece. Should you buy it complete on eBay? No, only psychos like me do that. That's it for this week. The next Chop Shop should be a bit more of a pain in the ass, and I know that much because I already did the captures. So like and subscribe, and you'll know about it when it happens 2 weeks from now. Later.